My name is Mikko Jarvenpaa, and I'll be talking about the social responsibility of data and data visualization. I'll go over why data literacy is a key social responsibility for the data industry. And it's going to be more of a description of challenge rather than a list of ready solutions, but something I hope that will help you think of your work with data in a bigger context. So I'll introduce myself and the company I represent quickly first. So I'm the COO for Infogram. I've been involved with the company in one shape or form from day one, and I recently took on a more operational role a few months ago with them. The company is a bit over 2 years old, and in terms of scale, currently the bit over 2 million infographics created by our users are seen currently by a bit over 12 million people per month, more or less. The company is primarily based out of Latvia. I'm here in San Francisco, and we're opening an office over here now. Our customers range from large publishers to educational institutions to individual bloggers and teachers and students, so forth. So the topic of my talk is about data literacy and how us working in the industry are uniquely positioned to address this issue, and how we actually might be the only ones who are able to do it as well as it should be done. And while data literacy may not sound like a huge thing, I'll go over a few examples of why it actually has repercussions to education, the economy, and even to democracy. And we're coming at this at a time when the data industry is under increasing public scrutiny. So the data collection on users and customers by companies is one thing, but the large-scale government data harvesting is an entirely different issue. And that's outside the scope of this presentation. This is merely a nod towards that this is the climate that we're operating in. And the data industry is not alone in this, of course. The increased transparency and prominence and interest in leaks and whistleblowing are issues that no company should take lightly. And whether this rise of the power of the court of public opinion is a triumph of democracy or a slide towards mob rule is also outside the scope of this presentation, although I'm personally interested in that quite a bit. So when we work with data, we work with technological innovations, and they're exciting, and they're doubly exciting because technology moves faster than legislation. So technology creates unregulated opportunities, and that places an even bigger burden on the business ethics and responsibility of us working with technological innovations. Working with technological innovations, we have to decide what we want to change the world into. Unregulated opportunities sound a bit like the new Wild West. Envision unscrupulous growth hackers mining for the big gold. But that's not the kind of a world we've ended up creating, albeit maybe in small pockets of the internet. But I'd argue that we've continued to navigate towards more sustainable, more ethical business climate. And even from pure business logic, an ethical stance makes sense, because anything but the shortest term perspective should take the responsibility of operations and business ethics at its core. And this is not only limited to companies that might be legislated, if Washington or some of the myriad lobby groups had their way, but it's also a case for companies who have products that change people's behavior. And this is very often the case when you introduce a product that changes the way people do things that they've done by definition differently in the past. You are introducing a change in behavior, and they can be small things. A single product can influence behavior only in a small way, but they accumulate. So in terms of going out for lunch, for instance, we may not ask people for lunch recommendations directly, but we'll look at Yelp and the reviews and ratings, and based on their algorithm decide where we want to go. We may not hail cabs in the street corner, but we'll wait for our phones to guide the car to us. And we may still call our friend up for a date, but we'll definitely check their updates on Facebook before that. So new ways of interacting create new behaviors and new expectations. And I'll spare laboring the point. We all know about big data, but the recent deluge of data has already changed the world. In the sense that if we consider a decade ago, the change in availability, volume, and accessibility of data is not merely a change in degree, it's a change in kind entirely. Data visualization, specifically, is an industry, or maybe rather a practice within the industry, that empowers users to communicate and think in new ways. So it creates new methods of communication and also calls for new skills of both creation and consumption in that. So it's a part of the concept of technological innovations often, and with its great power comes great responsibility. Before going into the specific case of data literacy, I'll use a couple of minutes to sketch out this really quick and dirty theory of corporate responsibility. So corporate responsibility, or CR, if I have to abbreviate that, is not only limited to large publicly traded companies, although that's where the academic research and public discussion usually concentrates on, but it's really relevant to companies of all sizes in all stages of their life, and I'll take a look at why that would be. At this point, I want to say that the references and material I've used are actually at the end of the presentation if you're interested in where I'm getting these. But if we break down corporate responsibility into three types, so it's easier to think about that, we'll end up with philanthropy, with innovation in corporate responsibility, and with integration of corporate responsibility. And they've got different strategic implications, which we'll look at now. Philanthropy is the traditional way of thinking about corporate responsibility. It's usually a non-core activity, and often there are no economic expectations to the results of philanthropy. So it's often seen as a profit-sacrificing initiative. Examples of this could be donations to charity, sponsorships, and employee volunteering, for instance. So a company could donate to a children's charity or send their employees to paint the local school, for instance, in this. And just because philanthropy is a traditional or conventional way of approaching corporate responsibility, it's by no means should be discounted because of that. It's very popular and highly valuable. But it does require a level of economic stability and financial muscle to engage in. Innovation in corporate responsibility is the second subtype, and that's very much at the heart of both like social entrepreneurship and also like these base of the pyramid approaches, where a business case and business model is constructed around not only generating revenue but also solving a social or environmental problem. So the expectation is both for this social/economic problem, whatever we want to solve, and revenue generation. The third one, which is of interest to us and which I'm building my points around especially, is the integration of corporate responsibility into operations and strategy. So this is close to the core business of the company. Examples could be controlling the environmental impact and costs by investing in more sustainable production or more sustainable energy. It could be spreading social good and managing the supply chain by more responsible buying in the supply chain. And of course, responsibility towards customers is part of this. So investments in research and development and product quality and safety are certainly parts. And there are economic expectations to this, but they could be also in the form of cost reductions, of course, an economic benefit, but also reputation management, supply chain management, or anticipation of legislation. So from a pure business logic, this is a kind of future-proofing of business operations. It's not merely just getting a moral high ground, but it's actually a risk management approach. So these three subtypes do definitely overlap. And a quick word about the relation of corporate responsibility to economic performance. The research and opinions on this have been inconclusive at best. So there's both negative and positive correlations. But it looks like the more strategic the initiatives in corporate responsibility are, the better predictors of economic performance they also are, which of course makes immediate common sense, because if you take it into a part of your strategy and manage and measure towards that, it's likely that you'll get there. So that's quickly the sort of the what and why of corporate responsibility. The how depends very much on the company, but we'll a quick word about the when. So this is very often, unfortunately, what the corporate responsibility formulation process looks like. We start business operations, we start to engage with our customers, suppliers, investors, stakeholders, shareholders, so forth. And out of these engagements, out of these operations, arise a need for principles, which we can tackle in an ad hoc manner, or indeed implicitly principles arise out of the way we just happen to deal with things. Either approach is definitely not very strategic. The simple prescription against this is, of course, taking the principles of responsibility into account early on in the strategy formulation process, and finding the ones that you think will be the most important to your business and most relevant to you as a business, especially in the long term. So even if we're not starting from a social innovation basis, we can still integrate the principles of responsibility into our operations, such as we looked at in the third type quickly. And this ensures that it's not implicitly decided ad hoc or even merely altruistic. So that's a quick and dirty look at corporate responsibility, and now I'll move more to how this is relevant to the data industry. So data literacy is what I'm aiming at here as the point of social responsibility that's relevant to us. Conceptually, data literacy is a part of the new digital literacies that have arisen in the last couple of decades as a result of the new methods of communication. Information literacy would be a closely relevant topic that also has large academic research around that. And there's more nascent, smaller niche literacies that are interesting as well, such as UI literacy, which is something that we are involved or at least exposed to all the time as we navigate product user interfaces and even create our own interfaces. So an example of data literacy could be comparing the visualizations of the same data set and comparing the values visualized in terms of their relative length or in terms of their relative corner angle, or in this case, a bar chart and a pie chart, respectively. So the data visualization, or rather, data literacy would not only involve understanding what the graphs say, but also seeing their differences. So also figuring out which one would be a better pick if we wanted to visualize, for instance, the order of the values. And that's, of course, the bar chart. So some numeracy is involved in data literacy, but the data visualizations aim to go beyond the numbers and to tell the story in a more powerful way. So instead of me telling you that if there was a shot put contest, the results would be 5 meters, 9 meters, and 11 meters. We can just draw a picture, a visualization of this that immediately tells the story behind those numbers. And that's why we do them, because they tell the stories. So literacy involves not only reading, but also writing. And that's the case with traditional literacy as well. It's not enough to just know how to read in order to be literate. You also have to know how to write in order to know how the language is used and to understand why another language user is using it in the way they are. With data literacy, we're working with different tools than words and sentences, and also being a completely digital industry by now, we also have these tools that have a lot of interactivity in them at our disposal, and that's really important for teaching literacy. So an example would be the range of values on a y-axis, also known as the up-down axis within the less data literate community. If you wanted to visualize the difference in the same data set between the values here, the 3 values, you would pick as narrow a range for the y-axis as possible. If you wanted to visualize the similarity between the values, you would pick as wide a range as possible. And for us in this audience, that's pretty much a given. Like, we understand this. We've been so exposed to this, and we have been taught the principles and so forth that this is not big news. But this kind of realization only comes after you have played with the data, after you have worked with it, after you've changed the settings and the ranges and so forth, and seen the difference that makes to the story that you want to tell. And this is not special to the data literacy, but it's especially strong in it because the presentations are so often visualizations. And the visualizations are certainly not to be underestimated. They are indeed the way that stories are told with data. Because visualizations engage our brains differently. They appeal to intuitive comparisons, natural comparisons, such as the bar chart versus pie chart example. It's much easier to figure out the length of a bar than the angle of a corner and compare them. And every time when data or numbers competes with a story in our brain, the story wins. Such in this case. So 1854, a cholera epidemic is spreading throughout central London. And this is a time before the germ theory of disease. A popular theory was the miasma theory, which said that disease spreads through the bad smell of sewage and rotting corpses and other nasty things like that, which was perhaps a useful approximation, but it didn't establish the causal chain. So at this point in the world, it was difficult to figure out what caused the disease, but what was known was that Soho in central London was being ravaged by the epidemic. And now, a physician by the name of John Snow that certainly knew something, did his research on this and visualized the data of the occurrences of cholera on a map. And he was able to show that they concentrated around a certain locus point, which was the Broad Street water pump in central Soho. This was not a straightforward argument that he presented to the city council with his findings. Like I said, it was before the germ theory, so even suggesting this kind of a causal link that it would come from the water was actually rather unpleasant for people to even contemplate as being the real option. But with the map in hand, as the story goes, he was able to convince them that this indeed was the source of the disease. They closed down the pump by removing the pump handle, which rendered it useless, and then quickly ended the cholera epidemic in central London. So there's more details behind that story, of course, but it shows an early win for data literacy and for data visualization. Because maps are data visualizations as well, after all. And like any other visualizations, they can have great communicative power. And then there are visualizations that may not have great communicative power. Coming from a product where over 2 million infographics have been created, a lot of them freely by the users, we've definitely seen our fair share of poor data visualizations, shall we say. Even though we've tried to limit the product in a way that it's difficult to create something that's really ugly. But even professionals can produce unreadable or confusing visualizations if they forget the responsibility of communicating to the audience. So I just ran into this a couple of days ago. I don't know the exact backstory here, but this is taken from a recent report on big and open data in Europe. So we can assume that it's by people in the industry. And this visualizes, you will not be able to read the small type, but it visualizes the promise, the potential of open data per sector of a market region, per given their share of the GDP of that region. So it crams a whole lot of information into one visualization. It uses a donut graph, which is just one way of making the pie chart even worse. Definitely my pet peeve, that thing. And it's the sort of the tragedy here is that it has a lot of information, and that there is actually insight to be taken out of this, but it takes a while to figure it out, which sort of loses the meaning of visualizing data in that sense. Perhaps building comparison, you could have chosen a slightly different type of visualization, or perhaps indeed it was the purpose of the person creating this or people creating this that they wanted to choose a language that was more difficult to understand to only address an audience adept at reading visualizations. So these examples have all contained insights and meaning, whether it's about learnings about the economy or really trying to change the world in order to save lives. But the point is that data matters, and data literacy matters because of that. And data matters for various reasons, of course, very contingent on the data, but it really boils down to the power of information. So in my business undergrad degree over a decade ago, in my first course, our dean who taught the course showed us this hierarchy. And he said that from data with skill and labor, the skill in this case being data literacy that we're talking about, arises information. And from information with even more hard work, you can get to knowledge. And then he added with kind of a heavy sigh, maybe being a bit doubtful looking at the wide-eyed audience of 20-year-olds, that some very few of you might even reach the level of wisdom at some point. So, with an imbalance in data literacy, which really is the stopgap for getting up in this hierarchy, with an imbalance in data literacy comes an imbalance in information and an imbalance in power. So, data is important because it presents the rational, factual details about the world to us. And data is also important because the information that we have learned to count on has a big emotional value in some cases. And here's a pretty recent case of that. You may have seen this. This made the rounds about a week ago, or within the last week if you follow the publishing platform Medium. But that's the map of Louisiana, the boot. It's a much loved symbol of the state, and you see it everywhere there. I was there 10 years ago last, so that's what my memory is based on. And to digress a tiny bit, I keep using maps as examples of data visualizations because the relationship is very much the same as with the bar charts and pie charts we looked at earlier. A map is not the territory, just like the visualization is not the phenomena being visualized. But they both abstract certain useful features of this ideally factual world and present them in an informative and information concise package. So the relation is very much the same. But back to Louisiana. Louisiana is one of the most environmentally challenged coastal areas in the US. And if we were to use the similar mapping logic that we did when we came up with this map, the map today would actually look something like this. And that's pretty shocking. That's a huge difference. So I don't know if that would really fly as the symbol of the state, but that would be a hell of a way to communicate the challenges from land erosion and rising sea levels over there. And it also poses other questions, such as like, when should we change a map? Do we change them every decade, or do we change them when they start to be useless for a certain part of the population, or half the people, or what? So this is mostly based on that one article, very in-depth article on Medium that I read. But so I've got more questions than answers behind this. But what I do know is that if something like this is going on, we need to know about that kind of stuff. It's often said that a free public press is a prerequisite of a working democracy. And a prerequisite for a public press is, of course, public literacy. People need to be able to read the information presented to them. In a very similar way, if people are to make informed decisions about the world around them based on the facts presented to them, they need to be data literate. Because data literacy really balances the scales of information. Without the access to information, people can be lied to, they can be manipulated, they can be exploited, or just kept in the dark. And some infographics, such as the map example from a century and a half ago, some infographics even today can change the world. As a recent example, Nigeria is just one of the countries that has made its its government data public. And Nigeria is a country of 175 million people, so that's by no means a small feat. And another public initiative went through that data, analyzed it, and visualized some key points of it. And it concentrated especially on the concept of ghost workers, which is really a type of corruption. A ghost worker is a name in the payroll whose paycheck somebody else is collecting. It could be an imaginary person, it could be a newborn baby, it can be a dead person. But the point is that there's certain slack in the budget because of this. And these visualizations were picked up by the mainstream media in Nigeria, and they caused a public outcry, which then resulted in a cleanup operation that is now estimated to be saving Nigerian government $700 million in corruption money. So it can really have a rather large impact when used in a responsible, accessible manner. The open data that is being now made available by multiple governments, and also the open data that's available from non-governmental sources, is very important, but that alone is not enough, because there also needs to be a power to communicate and present this data. And it's important to activism, journalism, and education as well. Activists want to change the world by showing how things are in the world and how they could be. Journalists are looking for new insights, new phenomena, but news from the wealth of data out there. And education, of course, creates the foundation for this, showing how data is used or how it can be abused. And at Google, we have this saying, and I'm sure they still do, that opinion and data, actually that's not the same. The saying is simply data trumps opinion, right? And for us, again, this is pretty much a given. If we have an argument where somebody has an opinion and somebody has data that conflicts that opinion, we are very likely to go with data, or at least we will check that data. But this is not the case everywhere in the world. Without data literacy, opinion, anecdotes, and data can be given equal consideration in an argument, no matter how frivolous the opinion, such as HIV doesn't cause AIDS, or that relaxing taxes on the rich benefits the economy as much as relaxing taxes on the poor. Maybe a bit more contentious example. But the point being that it's really data literacy that then gets us to the point where we can start to use that data to really navigate in ways that are more coherent with how the world is, really. The skills gap existing in data literacy is a major issue. So this is not merely a technological imbalance, as we've seen, but it really has societal repercussions. So journalists and media, especially in the developing world, but also at the margins of mainstream media in the developed world, lack the skills to be able to communicate and to create data-driven stories. And they also lack an audience who is able to understand these kinds of stories. So us in the industry are, like I said, uniquely positioned to do this. Also because this is what we do all the time. So if, like me, you work with a product that is used to present and manipulate data, this really is our responsibility, is what I'm arguing. We just have to wake up to the fact that the technological imbalance has major repercussions. Because infographics are not just eye candy, they can be powerful pieces of communication that can really change the world. And this call for data literacy also carries a certain urgency. So we're here in San Francisco on the end DataWeek. I actually don't know how many events of DataWeek have been arranged, but many places in the world haven't even had their data morning yet. So the problem also persists in the US. I'm sure the situation is better now, but at the end of the 90s, a large study concluded that 58% of US professional journalists did not have the skills to deal with the statistics that they were facing every day in their work. And if you need business logic behind this, remember that for there to be a demand for data products, there has to be a strong base of data literacy. Otherwise, it's like selling printing presses to the illiterate. It's not just a waste of time, but it's actually ignorant. So by supporting a strong base of literacy through engagement, education, and just a responsible, user-centric way of designing, developing, and marketing data products, we as an industry remain relevant and we meet our social responsibility. So I'll give you 3 examples of what we're doing with Infogram. I was told not to talk about our business, so I'll talk about our non-profit initiatives, which of course have business repercussions, as I've just argued. But as the first one, we have a strong and enthusiastic community around the product, given that it's a freemium product, and even the free version is very fully featured and pretty powerful. So we are this week launching Infogram.org, which is our way of empowering the people who care about the same social mission that we are. We have a network of ambassadors who are journalists, educators, or members of nonprofits, for example, who we support with educational material, training material, and whose events we can, for example, sponsor. The second thing is education. So we, of course, offer discounts to the educational sector, but we also make the free product as powerful as possible for use in, for instance, classrooms. So that is certainly enough for teaching data-driven stories and data visualization. This tweeted example comes from New Orleans, Louisiana again, just by coincidence, where 12-year-olds are creating infographics with the product. And the last point is maybe a bit left field, but we're also exploring the opportunity of engaging an even younger audience with the kind of critical thinking that data literacy needs. That's the company mascot Jiffo over there, and we're exploring building a game around him where he battles bad data by completing these data puzzles that we're building. So I'll just summarize with the thought that global data literacy is a real issue in the world, and if we as an industry want to integrate corporate responsibility into our operations, this is something that we should really be driving towards change in the world. Thanks very much.